Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back for another live episode of Gates of Goodness. I am your host, Youssef Kromah, where every night we'll be discussing a different gate of goodness in hopes to increase nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to increase ourselves in goodness. As Allah ta'ala says in Surah Ar-Rahman, Hal jaza'u al-ihsani ila al-ihsan. Is there any reward for good except good? So we'll be knocking at all the gates of goodness and asking Allah ta'ala to let us in this blessed month. Now tonight we'll be discussing calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and its pertinence at a local and global level. We'll be discussing stories from the Sirah and stories within our own personal lives. And I would like to begin by introducing our wonderful guest. Tonight we have someone very special all the way from Dearborn, Michigan, Sheikh Suleiman Hani. We'd like to greet him with the greetings of Jannah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan for having me back.
Alhamdulillah. So Sheikh Hani is our special guest tonight. He is our featured spotlight guest. I want you guys to know that, mashallah. He is from Dearborn, Michigan, as we said, in the United States of America. He works as an imam as well as an instructor for several international institutes. Also, Sheikh Hani recently published his first book, mashallah ta'ala, 114 tips to help you memorize the Quran. I myself will be getting a copy of this book, and I look forward to reading it, as I would very much like to finish the Quran, mashallah ta'ala. May Allah ta'ala allow us to, to have the success in our lives before we meet Him, inshallah ta'ala. And I would like to also introduce our other guests. We have our beloved brother Idris, who's a veteran of the show, mashallah ta'ala. And we have brother Amir Abdul Aad, mashallah. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So alhamdulillah, I'm going to get right into the topics of today. The first, we're going to be discussing calling to others to Islam as an honorable mission. As we know, this is the work of the prophets and the messengers. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent His prophets and messengers to teach al-Islam, to guide the people, to institute, to create institutions so people can find moral goodness. So I want to begin by discussing the pertinence of Allah ta'ala sending the prophets and the messengers and us following their examples and calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. This is a beautiful topic, and it's a long discussion without doubt. And perhaps the simplest way for me personally to explain this first aspect of da'wah, or calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with regards to the messengers, is that every messenger is a witness, first of all, against the people. And the followers are witnesses amongst themselves. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was commanded to say, as was mentioned in Surah Yusuf, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ. Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is my path. I'm inviting you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to worship the Creator. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to hold us accountable without sending us first a messenger with a message. And oftentimes we see people questioning the issue of messengers or scriptures or things like this, especially in our times. And this is not a new thing. And we see that people, they have, first of all, they have the free will to do what they want. But ultimately there's accountability. And the messenger that came to you is holding you accountable. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving everyone a fair chance. And the people who did not receive the message will also have their fair chance on the Day of Judgment. Wallahu a'lam.
SubhanAllah, it's very pertinent. And I'm thinking of the hadith where the Messenger of Allah said, "Balaghu anni walau ayah." That, tell about me, even if it's in a single ayah. So could you discuss that, our role, even if we're not du'at or, ulama by our nature, even if we can teach people something as small as an ayah, a small hadith, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا بِالشِّمَالِ, something simple like this. What's the pertinence of implementing these things in our lives?
I think the beautiful thing is that everyone is pretty much doing da'wah constantly, or should be doing da'wah constantly. A lot of times people think I have to be full-time in da'wah, or I have to have studied full-time, or I have to be a scholar. And the reality is everyone has their role to play, and everyone is extremely important. When we look around us at some of the greatest contributions to society or change, or people who became Muslim and then they themselves changed the world, you ask them, how did this start? What's your origin story? One of the most common things for people who became Muslim, people will ask, what's your story? I want to know your story. They're always fascinated. And most of the time, they became Muslim due to someone who was doing da'wah in a very simple way. And so the reality is, convey about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even if it's something minor, something simple, even if it's good character, opening someone, the door, smiling in the face of a stranger. Allahu a'lam, but we have these constant opportunities to do da'wah. in so many ways, so many platforms. We have technology now, smartphones, internet, all of this ability, this resource to do da'wah in so many ways. And you see that some people are very creative with it. Some people will take it, beyond what others are doing. So we all definitely have a role to play. Wallahu alam.
SubhanAllah. I'm left to think of the ayah where Allah Ta'ala says, Wallahu yad'u ila dar salam, that Allah invites to the abode of peace. So speaking of stories and invitations, I want to go to Idris and ask you about your story, about how you came to Islam, and what was the pertinence of da'wah in your particular life? Was there a particular individual who, introduced you to Islam? Was there some sort of event in your life where you were left stranded and you called upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
For me, actually, it's a little bit different than the typical, amazing big thing happened to someone. For me, it wasn't necessarily that sense that brought me to Islam. For me, I was actually in the American Marine Corps, and I was sent to Somalia during the conflict, the early conflict that when it first began, the problem there. And while I was there, before this, just to give you a little bit more background, I didn't know anything about Islam or Muslims. I only had one image, and this was sort of a black nationalistic Islam from a certain group in America. And that's all I thought I knew of Islam, and I knew that I didn't want anything to do with that. So when I went there, I didn't have any preconceived notions or understanding or even thinking. I didn't know anything about them at all. So while I was there, to move on the story along, is that I was actually doing guard duty of the embassy there, and there was walls, and I was on the wall at a certain time guarding, and there used to be this gentleman who used to come to the wall every day at the same time, or a time that I would tell him to come, and we would just talk because I didn't have anything else to do. And what he would do was talk to me about Tawheed, and that was it. He would talk about Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, and that's all he talked about the entire time for about a week and a half, the entire time. I was fascinated because I've never heard these topics before, and I never really contemplated them before. It just came at me that time. Before that, I was like typical American, just living my life and trying to make a living and move forward. And
do you mind me asking, were you Christian before, or?
Yes, I was Christian, but I wouldn't say I was devout Christian.
Yeah.
I didn't go to church. I just like the typical, a lot of Christians in America, sometimes we just say we're Christian by being born into it, and trying to be a good person. But I didn't really go to church and read the Bible. I wasn't really into that. I was young at the time. I took my Shahada when I was in my 20s.
MashaAllah.
So the guy was talking about Tawheed. And after, before that, I met him, I became curious because of the situation in Somalia. They were burning tires and certain things were going on, and I used to hear the adhan and think it was songs. I used to get angry. Why are they singing in the morning, waking me up? What is wrong with these people? They're so strange. But when he came and he enlightened me about Islam and Tawheed, that's when the light came on. And for me, I've never been one to, fight the truth. I've never been one that when your heart knows it's the truth, don't deny it just because of arrogance or whatever. Some people do this. So after a week, I said, okay, you know what? This is for me. This is the truth. This is something that has been brought to me that I never knew, never even existed. So after a week of him giving da'wah, coming back every day, giving me a pamphlet and learning, he took me to a masjid in Mogadishu, and after Jummah, I took my Shahada.
SubhanAllah.
So it wasn't because I heard Quran. I had never read the Quran. I took my Shahada, not read one ayah of Quran. So for me, it was a little different than a lot of people. Oh, I read the Quran, it changed. I didn't read the Quran. I didn't even know anything about Quran. It was just simply this man telling me about Tawheed, which is something the Rasulullah did. This simple way of calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling to Tawheed. Don't get into these fiqh issues and with non-Muslims. They don't understand. If they don't know who the Rabb is, why are you talking about hijab to them?
That verse that we mentioned in the very beginning, subhanAllah, you just reminded me, Ad'u ila Allah ala basiratin ana wa man ittaba'ani. So the Prophet ﷺ is inviting people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning to the oneness of the Creator. And this is basically the essence of everything that all the prophets called to, and every messenger came with the same message from the beginning to the end. And subhanAllah, sometimes we, as you said, people get distracted with all the other issues that society is discussing or going through at the time. And the reality is we need to always get back to this essence of worshiping the one Creator. And sometimes even with that topic, people go a little, too in-depth, or they become too advanced with some of the terminologies. Whereas it's very simple. Like the aqeedah, the tawheed of a Muslim is something that should be easy to summarize in like 5 to 10 minutes. And so, subhanAllah, we call people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes, subhanAllah, just like your story, they might have never read the Quran at times, or they might have not even known anything about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All they know is this is God. You worship the one God. He has some attributes and names, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So that was beautiful.
For me, it was simple. It was just simply made sense. Tawheed follows your fitrah. It's logical. It's enlightening. And it wasn't just me. I wasn't the only one. That day, it was about 3 or 4 of us. I don't know those guys now because there were other people I didn't know. All of us went to the masjid that day and took our shahada. They were in the military.
SubhanAllah.
I want to get Ahmed involved in the conversation. I know that you spent a year in the United States while you were studying at the University of Michigan.
Michigan State.
Yeah, Michigan
Be
State
careful.
University.
Michigan State University is different. Be
They are
careful.
rivals.
They're rivals.
Michigan State University.
Exactly.
There you are. So, did you have any experiences working with people, giving dawah and things like this?
Yes, I had some experiences with my colleagues. Like for them, what struck me the most was their ignorance about Islam and the Muslim world and the word Islam and Muslim. They didn't even know the difference between Muslim and Islam. It's like I had this lecture once, my professor challenged the whole class. It's like, can you tell me the difference between Islam and Muslim? And then one of the people sitting next to me, she said, that's easy. Islam is like the religion, Muslim is ISIS. I said, what? No, please don't share this with the class.
Yeah.
So I was like surprised. And then I started telling people like, what is Islam? What is the word Muslim means? And I discovered that the best way is to be the example yourself. It's not about telling people like information, because people can get this information from the internet, from the with one click they can get articles on Islam or Muslims. But become the example of a good Muslim, and then they will start asking you because they're curious. And this is what I did actually. So I had some conversations with non-Muslims in the US, and they were so curious to know about Islam after meeting me, or after, like, I took once one of my colleagues to the masjid. Like, she was so curious, she was atheist, and she asked me, what is to be a Muslim? What do you do in the mosque? What's the rituals? Because I don't know anything about this. So I took her to the masjid, and she experienced the Gom'a prayer with the sisters, and she was so excited. And she told me, this is so exciting. I'm gonna read more about Islam and about how to be a Muslim and stuff. I was so happy to do this actually. I told her thank you for doing this.
Alhamdulillah. I would like to inform the viewers that the phone line is now open. Please feel free to give us a call and join in this very, very pertinent discussion. And I would like to go back to the Sheikh. I find oftentimes that there's two sort of du'a, right? There's the one sort of da'i, I believe, such as yourself, that's very systematic and intentional in your da'wah, in your lectures, preparing presentations and things like this, and calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Am I correct in this way? And then you have another sort of da'i who is just an everyday person who is just being Muslim. And you can be both, of course. And it's pertinent. Inshallah, it's good to find balance between the two. But I find that certain times, unintentional da'wah is very, very effective. For example, I can remember being very younger in high school, and I had a mentor to me. You know, he was my own mentor. And we used to go out early in the morning and talk about nonviolence, to talk about systemic oppression and things like that in high schools. And I used to get these really bad headaches sometimes in the mornings. So I would like say, I need a second to go to the car and just recite some things. So I would just recite the Fatiha, and I would come back, and I'll be good. So one day he was like, man, what are you doing, man? Like, what's wrong with you? Every time you get a headache, you go in the corner, and I see you doing these things. Like, you're strange. So I said, no, I'm just reciting a prayer, and it helps me. And he was blown away. So maybe like 2 years later, he ended up becoming Muslim, and he said that really affected me in that, instead of taking medicine or anything like that, you went and you said a prayer. So he became Muslim, his wife became Muslim, and all his children became Muslim as well. And for me, I was like, I never made any dawah to him, I never told him about Tawheed or anything. I just said the Fatiha because I had a headache. And that for him was enough to, know that this was a very wholesome religion. So could you offer any insight on this?
Absolutely, subhanAllah, that's amazing. There's a lot of similar stories to that that are always just mind-blowing because you really don't know where the effect will come in. Sometimes, like you said, one of the most powerful ways to call people to Allah is unintentional. And it's just simply being a Muslim, being proud to be Muslim, not being afraid to show people that you're Muslim. You guys discussed the topic of Muhammad Ali yesterday, rahimahullah. And although I really wanted to be here, I ended up, subhanAllah, getting delayed in my flight. One of the most amazing things about him is that he had 100% confidence. No shame whatsoever, no inferiority complex as many Muslims do. There is nothing in Islam for us to be ashamed of. There is nothing in any of our teachings that we should be embarrassed about or feel like we have to hide. Oftentimes, just like you said, you might just be practicing your religion faithfully and as a principle, and because you are practicing it continuously, you end up calling other people to Islam through that behavior. I had a similar experience, subhanAllah, about 7 or 8 years ago. We were doing an internship program. This was in the Caribbeans. And I don't want to get too much into it, but long story short, I was trying to call other people to understand Islam that were with me, other students. And there was this really young guy that was following me around from the United States. Everybody else is from the rest of the world. And he's the only one that he felt, I could relate to because I was also from the US. So he's following me around. He was 16 years old. Everyone is 21 and older. And he follows me until I think the 5th or 6th week. Finally, we're sitting down talking and we're eating, and he's sitting in front of me and he says, "Hey, I heard that Muslims are terrorists. Do you know anything about Muslims?"
Oh, there we go.
And I just stared at him. I said, "What?" I said, "I'm Muslim, right?"
All right.
He was eating his burger and his mouth just dropped. He's like, "What?" He's like, "How can you be Muslim? You're one of my best friends." And I'm like, there's no conflict between the two. I can be a good friend and a Muslim. He's like, "Well, tell me about Islam." I said, "Didn't you realize I was leaving every couple hours to pray and come back?"
That's amazing.
He's like, "I noticed you left. I thought you were going to the bathroom all the time." I'm like, "What?" Everybody else knew I was going to pray, and I didn't even regard somebody who was much younger. I thought he wouldn't understand. SubhanAllah, he ended up becoming Muslim before anybody else. He was 16 years old. He started calling his family to Islam. And what got him was basically the seeing just me being a basic Muslim. I was not doing anything special or extraordinary. And this guy went back home to Colorado and started learning Arabic.
Allah.
He calls me up about 2 or 3 days after this internship finished. And he says, "Hey, I want to say something to you." I'm like, "What is it?" And then he says the Shahada on the phone.
Allah.
It just moved me.
Allah.
And I was so happy, subhanAllah, because I was kind of disappointed in myself that you don't realize who around you is affected by what you're doing.
Yeah, you don't.
But again, every single Muslim has a role to play. Some people, maybe some of our viewers, maybe sometimes we will go through this. Sometimes people feel, "Hey, I'm not the right person. Somebody else will do it." Or, "Hey, I don't want to be a hypocrite." This trick that I don't want to be a hypocrite, I'm committing sin, so I can't really be calling people to something good. That's not true. When something like that happens, when a thought enters your mind, like right now in Ramadan, a lot of people are sending in the same question, asking, if I don't pray, is it true my fast doesn't count? In that case, why should I pray? Why should I fast? So at this moment, when shaitan tells us basically to go backwards, whether it's in da'wah or anything else, you have two options. You can either start doing what you're supposed to be doing and keep moving forward, or you can say, "Yeah, you know what, if it's not going to count, forget all of it," and go backwards with shaitan. So when it comes to da'wah, you have the option. Don't feel hypocritical. Don't feel like you have to do something special. Don't feel like you have to be someone who studied something intensively. If you fulfill certain conditions in some ways, it would work for active da'wah. But for unintentional da'wah, anybody can do it. Any Muslim who's practicing their faith can do it. And I really believe that. And subhanAllah, just like the example you mentioned, you're making dua and somebody else asked you about it, they ended up becoming Muslim.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah.
I call it like tricking people and becoming Muslim. Oftentimes I meet these people, man, they're very hardcore. I go to these places and, I'm maybe dressed like this with a suit and a tie, and they don't, see me to be a Muslim, right? And we'll have these amazing conversations, right? And then somehow or another we'll get on ISIS or something like that on Muslims, and they will completely bash Muslims. "I hate Muslims, they're destroying this country," and I'll just let them go on and go on. I'm really nice and casual, and then I'll get up and leave. "Oh, I just want to let you know my name is Youssef and I'm a Muslim." And they're like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Muslims are great now." So, and they'll always say, "I have this one Muslim friend," things like this. Mashallah. But for those who are at home and sitting and thinking to themselves, "I want to give da'wah, I want to be a da'i," are there any like steps that you can to give someone or some tips to becoming a da'i? You know, even if it's some text they should read,
Yeah.
some some beginning approaches that one could take to to approach the field of da'wah.
Absolutely. I think, and we can make this a discussion. I think it is a long topic to say how can I basically become an active da'i or da'iyah. It is a long discussion without doubt. And I think there's even a workshop called the Da'wah Workshop on Huda TV as well, which is really amazing, mashallah. But some of the simple steps that maybe we can all offer is to mention that first, we always have to rectify our internal selves. We always have to work on ourselves. No matter how bad things get, we have to balance between giving this its priority and the external its priority as well. So there has to be 100% sincerity if somebody wants to fulfill or pursue da'wah. So number one, I would say, is sincerity without doubt. Because anything done without sincerity is rejected, and the efforts are actually magnified when you have ikhlas. So anyone who does anything sincerely for the sake of Allah, whether they see the results or not does not matter. If they're putting in 100% effort and they're 100% sincere, leave the results up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we see examples like, our three heroes, those three Muslim college students who were shot and killed by an anti-theist in Raleigh, North Carolina. May Allah have mercy on them. Now it's been over a year. Now, when they died, a lot of people know, they realized only after their death, is that they had a small charity for, Liya had a small charity for dental relief for refugees. And after he passed away, or after he was murdered, may Allah have mercy on him, they ended up raising more than $750,000 for that small goal that started off with $15,000. And they ended up getting, a lot of people were doing scholarships on their behalf, endowments at the universities, so on and so forth, over $1 million. And the scholars who basically saw this said the same thing, that this was only a person who had sincerity in what they did, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala magnified their deed after they passed away. Allahu a'lam.
Wow. SubhanAllah. I know, Brother Idris, we've spoken many times about your intention of coming to Egypt to study and being a student. And I still see you as a student now. It's very studious, mashallah. I learn from you a lot every time we meet. So I appreciate that. Any steps you can talk about in your pursuit of knowledge since you've come to Egypt?
I think the number one thing is, like we always talk about, we talked about this on many different shows, is you have to have the right intention. Your niyyah needs to be rectified, and why you do it. If you rectify this, it corrects a lot of other things and barriers that you see them as barriers. You will no longer see them that way. I mentioned this before, is that it's sort of like a mental check for yourself that makes you see through a lens that which other people don't see. That person may see something and say, oh my God, how did you deal with this? And you're looking at it like, what's wrong? I don't know. What's wrong? You don't see a problem because you're seeing it through a different lens. This niyyah will change that, because it takes patience to come after and seek the learning this deen. It takes patience. It isn't something that's going to come and fall in your lap and you hear, oh, give me, and it comes to you and you just eat it. It's not going to happen. It's something that you have to have patience for and go after. And there will be many obstacles to Allah tests you. Why would He give you this, boom, I'm going to make you an alim, just like this? He's going to test your resolve. Is this what you really want? Do you want to come closer to me? Who are the closest people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Those with knowledge. This is what we learn in the Quran. So it's going to be a test. If you just want to be a layman who sells dates on the corner of the street and you're not really worried about it, and just want to do your regular ibadah, that's a different story. You'll have a different type of test. But the person who seeks after the knowledge, it's not an easy thing. But it's a fruitful thing once you start seeing the change in your behavior and the thing that comes. You'll notice it. You'll start feeling a comfort and a contempt in your heart that you've never felt before. I mean, think about how you have, in the past, we have so many ulama who have been in prison, and they were just happy and smiling, and didn't bother them.
And the present day too, subhanAllah.
Yes, even at this time, like how can something like that, a person be happy? Except that they're happy with Allah.
SubhanAllah, it's a very, very great time to go to our video that we have with Ahmed Didat and his journey to making da'wah. Dear viewers, stay tuned for a video with Ahmed Didat.
Ahmed Hussein Didat, July the 1st, 1980 to August the 8th, 2005. The world's most renowned Muslim scholar of comparative religion, Sheikh Ahmed Hussein Didat, was born in the Surat district of India in 1918. The Muslims' devoted scholar, commonly known as Sheikh Ahmed Didat, had no recollection of his father until 1927. His father, a tailor by profession, had emigrated to South Africa shortly after the birth of Ahmed Didat to spread Islam and in search of earning to support his family. With no formal education and a young man trapped in the shackles of extreme poverty at the age of 9, Ahmed Didat went to South Africa in 1927, where he lived with his father and grew to the most prominent Dawah scholar of comparative religion of his time. His farewell to his mother in India in 1927, with his eyes flooding in tears, was the last time he saw his mother alive, for she passed away a few months after Didat's departure. He concentrated diligent efforts in his studies to maintain academic excellence. His avid passion for reading helped him gain promotions until he completed Standard 6. However, insufficient finances forced him out of the classroom. At the age of 16, desperate to pursue education, he left school with his heart floundering in sorrow, despair, and disappointment. Subsequently, he began doing labor work to make ends meet. In 1936, Ahmed Didat worked at a Muslim-owned store near a Christian seminary on the Natal South Coast in South Africa. The incessant insults of the Christian trainee missionaries hurled against Islam during their brief visits to the store infused a flame of displeasure in the desire within the young man to counteract their false propaganda. By the grace of Allah, Ahmed Didat discovered a book entitled Idhar al-Haq, meaning the truth revealed, in his ceaseless efforts and pure chance in search of the truth, which changed his life forever. The book recorded the techniques and enormous success of the efforts of Muslims in India in turning the tables against Christian missionary harassment during the British subjugation and rule of India. In particular, the idea of holding debates had a profound effect on Ahmed Didat. With this newly found zeal, Ahmed Didat purchased his first effective Bible studies and began holding organized debates and discussions with the trainee Christian missionaries. After receiving his fervent and healthy inspirational ideas and experience on religious debates, the missionaries began retreating in the face of his incisive counter-arguments. Brother Ahmed Didat began spreading his debates further by calling on Bible teachers and even priests in the surrounding areas to engage them in comparative religious debates. With the guidance of Allah and the power of truth, successes spurred on the path of Ahmed Didat, navigating him in the direction of Dawah. Nothing of his great responsibilities and challenges, including his marriage, children, and a 3-year medical checkup to Pakistan after its independence, interrupted his enthusiasm or veered his desire to defend Islam from the venomous distortions of the Christian missionaries. With missionary zeal to protect the truth and beauty of Islam, Ahmed Didat immersed himself into a host of activities over the next 3 decades of his life. He conducted classes on Bible studies and gave numerous lectures around the world. Not only did Brother Ahmed Didat exert humble efforts in spreading Islam, but also he spent time and resources to found Islamic foundations for the spreading of Islam. In his humble efforts in the service of Islam to please Allah the Most High, Didat established the As-Salam, an institute to train propagators of Islam. Brother Didat, together with his family, almost single-handedly erected the buildings including the masjid, which is still a landmark today. Sheikh Didat was also a founder member of the Islamic Propagation Center International, IPCI, in Durban, South Africa, for which he became president. Brother Didat devoted his life in the service of this great religion, with a driving passion and love that made him author and publish several books and distribute millions of copies free of charge around the world. He delivered thousands of lectures all over the world and successfully engaged prominent Christian evangelists in public debates. Several thousand of people have come into the fold of Islam as a result of the humble efforts of Brother Ahmed Didat. He published more than 20 books and distributed millions of copies of free literature and pamphlets the world over. Many of Sheikh Didat's publications have been translated into different languages around the world, including Russian, Urdu, Arabic, Bengali, Bangladeshi, French, Amharic, Chinese, Japanese, Malayalam, Indonesian, Zulu, Afrikaans, Dutch, Norwegian, amongst others. In a fitting and honoring tribute to this monumental achievement, he was awarded the King Faisal International Award in 1986, a prestigious recognition of enormous value in the world of Islam. However, no number of awards and honors can truly capture Sheikh Ahmed Didat's essence and zeal for Islam. The best of his awards will be granted to him by Allah in the world after. After spending the maximum of efforts and sacrificing his life in the service of Allah and his deen, Islam, fighting the forces of misguidance and propagators of feud against Islam and Muslims, he became ill and was recalled to meet his Lord. Sheikh Ahmed Didat passed away on August the 8th, 2005, aged 87. We pray that Allah accept all his good deeds and his work in the service of Islam and comparative religion. Amen.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our episode of Gates of Goodness, where we're discussing the significance of da'wah and its pertinence in the social context and also in a global context. As Muslims, we're taught to give da'wah, to call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger, and that's one of our purposes here in this life. So we picked up off last time discussing the different ways that people can give da'wah, and we want to move into how people give da'wah, not so much of what they what the ways they give da'wah, but how people give da'wah. You'll find people sometimes they're very harsh in their talking, communicating with people. Sometimes they'll belittle their ideas and say this is the best way, Islam. This is the only way, and they'll minimize the thoughts and ideas of other people. So how do we give da'wah in maintaining that our religion is the truth, but not to diminish other people or minimize them or make them feel small in our efforts to give da'wah, both Muslims and non-Muslims?
SubhanAllah, I think there is something called reverse da'wah, and it causes a lot of damage to people who are trying to do da'wah in the right ways. And sometimes it comes from Muslims doing da'wah to Muslims and Muslims doing da'wah to non-Muslims. And this is with regards to people who are extremely harsh and rigid in their approach, thinking everything is black and white. So I'm going to say this and it's truth and you have to accept it. And oftentimes they don't realize that there are, we have commandments in the Quran to call to people, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with wisdom and with a gentle approach, or the right approach, the right word. ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة. Call to the way of your Lord with wisdom. A lot of people are calling to others with very harsh manners, or rather no manners, and then people are calling each other amongst Muslims to their idea or their understanding of something, and they're extremely rigid, and what they end up doing is pushing people away. And that's the essence of it. They're pushing people away. And so we have to realize that we don't necessarily need to be overly sensitive with everything, because some people take that also to an extreme. We have to speak the truth. We have to be wise in our approach, and we have to know when to say something and when not to. Because, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah was one time walking with a companion who narrated the story, and he said they saw a group of people drinking alcohol, and they were Muslims. And they kept going, and Ibn Taymiyyah didn't say anything. So he asked Ibn Taymiyyah, why didn't you say anything to these people? They're drinking. You should have basically forbade evil, right? Al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy al munkar. So you should have forbidden them from doing something wrong. He said, because I know these people, and if I had said anything, then they would have went to the houses of innocents and robbed them and killed them. So he left them alone because they were in a state of drunkenness. So we have to know when to call people and when not to. But all the time, regardless, we have to know how to use gentleness in our approach. Because calling others to anything good is only adorned, as the Prophet ﷺ said, through gentleness. So he said anything that has gentleness is adorned, and anything without it becomes ugly or reprehensible, to paraphrase the hadith. So I think even advising one another if I came up to you in a very harsh way, you're most likely not going to take what I have to say.
Naturally
And this
so.
is something we all have experienced in our lives. So gentleness is an essential part of da'wah, whether it's to Muslims, non-Muslims, old or young, whether it's intentional or unintentional. We need gentleness in our approaches. The Prophet ﷺ came as a mercy to mankind. So who are we to follow any other path in approaching people? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the gentle.
Ameen. SubhanAllah. I remember there was a time I was in the masjid, and there was a brother I was praying next to, and after salat, I went and did the sunan, and he sat there. The entire masjid left, and he sat right there waiting for me after my sunan. As soon as I said Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, I couldn't even finish the salam, and I went to get up to leave, and he struck my chest really hard, like he hit me. And I never saw this guy in my life. So I'm thinking, like, why did this guy just put his hands on me, right? So he's like, sit down. I noticed in salat you were yawning, and when you yawn, you covered your mouth like this. He said, no, the scholars say that when you yawn, you're supposed to cover your mouth like this. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, seriously, like, that's what you waited all salat for this to do that? And, subhanAllah, I thought about that, and it really affected me, and that I didn't know whether or not that was true, that it was better to do this or as opposed to that, but at that moment, I didn't care.
Yeah.
So sometimes in your efforts to give somebody da'wah, you can actually turn them away from the thing which you're calling to. So any insight on this? You guys have any similar stories or things like this? Or
Yeah, I think the problem is a lot of the youth and their zeal and their love and their, wanting to be better the ummah and the deen, and tend to go too far. They read into stories about how everyone knows Umar ibn Khattab. They read into these stories and they think this is how you should be all the time. And a lot of them sometimes, usually, not everyone, but a lot of them come from rough backgrounds.
Sure.
Like, me and you, we come from, areas where we know people who came from rough backgrounds. So they have this baggage with them. So they end up giving da'wah and they think it's, calling to good, forbidding the evil, calling to good. They think this is the way to do it. But they forget that this wasn't the characteristic of the Rasulullah ﷺ or the Sahaba. Even Umar al-Khattab wasn't like this. It wasn't their characteristic. He was known as Halim. He was known as the person who was slow to anger. I mean, look what happened in his da'wah. I mean, the guy who came and grabbed him and said, give me from what your Lord gave you. I mean, he grabbed him by his collar so much that he jacked him up and left a red mark on his neck. And what did he do? Told his Sahaba, give him until he's happy. I mean, they don't realize that this is the overwhelming majority of how his character was. There's a time to be rough, and and most of the time it's not. The times to be rough are very few. It shouldn't be what your characteristic is. It shouldn't be where you're always pointing and worried about what someone else is doing. You should worry more about what you're doing and gently worry about what everyone else is doing. Be rough to yourself. So I think this is a cause of it. We have a spike in the youth who come from rough backgrounds, who tend to get into the deen, and they tend to be very rough with a lot of people and push them away.
I think that's very true, subhanAllah. I think also it's not always just the youth who come from rough backgrounds. Oftentimes it's somebody who just became religious and they want to basically go all out.
Yes.
And so they're going all out with the external aspect more than the internal, and they usually have a lot more problems to deal with internally than externally. And what they end up doing is basically trying to enforce this newfound religiosity or extreme religiosity that they're trying to implement on everybody else around them. And it's a black and white thing. And 100% of the time, it's people who have not studied properly. Because the more you study, the more you see that gentleness is the approach. And the more you study, the more you see the various opinions, as long as they have valid evidences. And the more you study, the more you become wise and you gain experience with how to deal with people. Because a lot of times the scholars say, for example, a person who just studies from a book or somebody who just studies like YouTube lectures, they're going to have a small aspect of whatever they're gaining, and they're missing out on the important aspect of dealing with people. And that gives you experience that's unfound in any book. You cannot ever buy that or find it anywhere else. And so the more you deal with people and the more you study, the more you gain this wisdom and gentleness in your approach. If you look at the commandment to Musa alayhi salam, to Fir'aun, when he was calling to him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, call, and both of you call unto them with gentleness, right? قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا, something gentle, something light. So if this is to Fir'aun, one of the worst people in history, how is it to a Muslim, your brother and sister? How is it to a non-Muslim who knows nothing about Islam? A lot of times we deal with non-Muslims who don't know anything about Islam except what they see in the false media. And what happens is they don't already have a correct understanding. So why are you pushing them further away from something that's truthful? If what you have is truthful, be gentle, be understanding to their situation, and be considerate, and know that the gentle approach will always be more effective than anything else. Absolutely.
SubhanAllah. Brother Amir, would you like to add to this discussion, inshallah?
Yeah, I have two incidents that happened in front of me about being gentle in da'wah. So the first one, when I was attending a class on race and diversity in the U.S. So like everyone is like, the professor was discussing being black, being white, being Middle Eastern or something. So one of my colleagues sitting next to me, who was his ancestors came from Italy, so he looks Middle Eastern, Sicily or something. And then he was discussing with me. He said, you know, man, I look Middle Eastern. It gives me a lot of troubles. People take me as a terrorist, like these Muslims. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, go on. So I was smiling, and then he told me, where are you from? And I said, yeah, you know, I'm a Muslim from Egypt, so it's fine. So he told me, oh, I'm sorry. I said, no, it's fine. Like, people get this false idea about Islam and Muslims from media all the time. So I totally understand what you're going through. And then he became one of my friends, and then we spoke a lot about religion. I discovered he's atheist. So we talked a lot about Islam and Muslims. So I think about it, if I'm not gentle to him, or I come back to him like in very harsh ways, like don't say this about Muslims or Islam because I'm one of them, it will be totally different. I couldn't have the chance of talking to him about Islam and Muslims and give him knowledge. I don't know if it helped him or not, but at least I did my part. Like after this, I think he got a better idea of being a Muslim, or these people are not terrorists, or like they're gentle or something. And the second one of being harsh to people, or you need to understand and you need to choose the moment of making da'wah to people. Because one of my friends, she went to Morocco on a study abroad program, and before going to Morocco, she was thinking of reading the Quran for the first time. And she's not Muslim. And then right after getting to Morocco, and her host family have her or something, like after 2 days, she was going through jet lag and culture shock and everything. And then one of her host family members, she took her and sat her in front of the TV and told her, okay, let's watch Mecca now. she was so upset, and she ended up not reading the Quran for the whole stay in Morocco. And then she met me, and I told her this is not the good way of doing, telling people this stuff. And we talked a lot a lot about Islam and Muslims, and then she told me, I'm going to read the Quran now. So I was so happy that I changed this reverse da'wah that she had the experience. Alhamdulillah.
Now, we have 5 minutes left on the show, inshallah. I just want to touch on another thing. This is from your story. On the reverse side of that, is there a time when being harsh is necessary? I was talking with my friend about da'wah and being harsh with people, and he said that, well, you know, the Sahaba, they were hard upon Ahlul Bid'ah. And I was like, okay, easy, right? But, you know, I thought about that because it's a point that he made. Of course, I didn't agree. Initially, I thought about the effectiveness of what you're trying to do and its consequences. But was there a time when the Sahaba were difficult with people that were committing bid'ah, things like this? And is there a time when it's necessary to be harsh in da'wah?
This is actually, it's a really long discussion, subhanAllah. But I think there are definitely times in which a person has to be strong in da'wah. I don't think harsh is always the correct word, but more importantly, the example that you gave is a lot of the times the youth will say things like, but this is the truth, right? But this is the truth. There's a difference between confidence and harshness. There's a complete difference. For example, as you guys discussed yesterday about Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah, he was very confident.
Sure.
He was very, very confident. When it comes to the people who discuss, for example, how the companions would refute Ahlul Bid'ah. First of all, most of the youth who use this term, Ahlul Bid'ah, they don't even know who Ahlul Bid'ah are. They think it's anybody who does any kind of minor innovation, and there's a difference of opinion. They know nothing about this. And whereas Ahlul Bid'ah in the past was referring to some of the greater deviancy, people who are doing really horrible things like Al-Khawarij, who are killing innocent people and basically making every Muslim a kafir. And so this is a whole other issue, and this is a long discussion again. But a lot of the youth don't realize that there are steps that lead to certain incidents like this. And the Sahaba, without doubt, would know when to use this exception, and when they had the upper hand, and when it was necessary, and when it would cause less harm. Because a lot of the times people who say that this is the norm, to be rough with your da'wah or harsh with your da'wah, this is unfound. This is completely unfound, because what it ends up doing is causing much more harm than good.
Exactly.
And that's the essence of it. If your da'wah is going to cause more harm, then it's not effective da'wah.
Right.
And so a lot of the youth or the people who are passionate or overzealous in their faith need to understand that there are ways to do things effectively. And again, it doesn't mean that we're rejecting what the companions did. Of course not. We're following the companions in their understanding. But don't take parts of it, and also don't take things out of context.
Exactly. Context.
Because the context definitely matters. They take things and they don't understand. Umar al-Khattab used to cry very easily. Radiallahu anhu. He would be moved when somebody would tell him, you have a shortcoming. He would say, Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, may Allah have mercy on the one who shows me my faults. Whereas these same people who tell you, let's have this harsh da'wah, let's refute Ahlul Bid'ah, let's do this and that, if you came to them and advised them, they would reject what you would have to say.
Sure.
And that shows, their reaction to the harshness shows how much they hate it and what's lacking internally. Because the scholars do say that what you see externally of a person in their manners has a reflection, it's related, directly connected to their faith internally. So your manners do play a role. So the more a person is spiritually connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the more they have of sound knowledge, the more they would be externally showcasing that knowledge or exemplifying that good knowledge through good manners, whether it's through da'wah or just daily living, through everything else. Allahu a'lam.
SubhanAllah. Just in closing, that makes me think of a very pertinent point, which is self-da'wah. Right? Giving da'wah to yourself before you can speak to anyone else. Give yourself tarbiyah. What are the things that I'm lacking? What are the things in my own mannerisms? Things that I can benefit myself before I go out and refute Ahlul Bid'ah or show everybody else their flaws. How can I fix my own shortcomings? One of the ulama was asked, who is the most sinful person you know? And he said, me. I don't know anybody more sinful than myself because I know myself better than anyone else. And this is, I think, some of the behaviors and the sorts of thinking that we lack. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy.
I mean, Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he had a famous statement, and one of the things that he said, to paraphrase it quickly, is that oftentimes when someone does something wrong to you, or when they commit a wrongdoing, a lot of these people will either rush to criticize or insult them, or if somebody did something wrong to you, they'll rush to basically be upset with you and hold a grudge. And then he said, but when you yourself commit a sin, you let yourself off easily. You let yourself off easily. You forget about it. The next day it's gone. He said the reality is you should be more harsh with yourself internally, whether it's through self-reflection or through prayer or through increased deeds or through istighfar or dua. He said you need to be rougher with yourself internally because you yourself, your nafs, will affect your hereafter, your eternal life. Whereas these other people are not going to affect your hereafter. But we shouldn't let ourselves off easily, subhanAllah. No.
SubhanAllah. Any last minute insights, inshallah, before we finish? We have about a minute and some change left.
I would just add one thing, and to know that there's I wouldn't call it harsh, but there should be a time when you're stern, because this is a technique of da'wah. The Rasulullah used to remind the Quraysh about nar. You're going to go to the fire. You're going to go to the fire. This is what some people would consider harsh, but I don't consider it harsh. I consider it more of a stern warning. So as far as that's concerned, yes. But some of the youth, as you said, be harsh on Ahlul Bid'ah, they're taking it completely out of context. They're taking something that's from an Islamic society, or maybe boycotting someone will affect them. The Sahaba who missed the battle, who stayed back, they boycotted them, and it was effective because it was an environment that was conducive to this. Most of the time, they don't have the wisdom to know that, when to do certain things. So they end up taking it all blankly and just making it a general thing. When they don't realize these are specific things.
But also, you don't want to desensitize people as well. If you're always telling somebody about the hellfire, after a while they just, okay.
You should go to both.
Right.
Also, it's important to, exactly. You notice in the Quran, hellfire and paradise are mentioned almost always comparatively, but not always, but generally they're mentioned together. And you see that Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, for example, was more moved by verses of punishment and consequences than reward for motivation. And so, again, you approach people based on their level of understanding. So if you're approaching, somebody who went through a certain traumatic experience or somebody who went through a specific incident, you have to know the people you're addressing. You have to know what they need. You have to know what would affect them and motivate them, because everyone is different. Allahu alam.
SubhanAllah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. The time has come for us to depart. It's been a wonderful episode of Gates of Goodness. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow night for another episode, inshallah ta'ala. Dear viewers, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in goodness this month, to enter us in the gates of goodness, and to accept our deeds of fasting and siyam and acts of ibadah during this blessed month. I'm your host, Youssef Kromah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.